Good evening, I'm Katie Wilson and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. Russian attacks against Ukraine kill at least 9 civilians and injure over 40 others. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio meets Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov for fresh talks on Ukraine. Bosnia marks 30 years since the Srebrenica genocide. At least 9 civilians were killed and dozens were injured in a wave of Russian attacks across Ukraine in the past 24 hours. Strikes hit cities and towns from Donetsk to Kharkiv, where a maternity hospital was damaged. It comes as Moscow says it's waiting for Ukraine to propose new dates for peace talks, but Kiev maintains there will be no negotiations until prisoner exchanges are complete.
Russia has launched a fresh barrage of drone and missile attacks across Ukraine, killing at least 9 civilians and injuring over 40 others in the last 24 hours. In Kharkiv, one of the hardest hit areas, a maternity hospital was struck, leaving shattered glass across delivery rooms and forcing evacuations of women in labor.
We woke up and heard a very loud whistle. My husband and I got up and rushed to our little one, and at that moment there was a hit and the windows shattered. Thank God we are alive and unharmed. We grabbed our son and ran to the basement.
Alexandra Lavrinenko had just given birth. Her husband said they barely escaped in time.
When the first explosion happened, I ran to the baby. My wife stood up and I moved our son straight away into the corridor. Then there was a second impact. It blew windows off.
The head doctor confirmed several delivery and surgery rooms were badly damaged.
The maternity ward building was seriously damaged, especially the side where the delivery and operating rooms are. We had women who had just given birth the day before yesterday and yesterday. There were also women recovering from surgery in the maternity ward.
President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the attack, saying that Russia targets life, even where it's just beginning. He also stressed Ukraine's urgent need for more air defense systems. Ukraine's Air Force said it intercepted 60 drones overnight, but 19 struck targets across 8 regions, including in Donetsk and Kherson. The Russian Defense Ministry said its troops also launched a large-scale attack on Ukrainian military facilities using high-precision long-range weapons and drones, and that all the planned targets were hit. The latest attacks come as Russia says it's awaiting Ukraine's proposals for a new round of talks. But with the country reeling from bombardment and Kiev waiting for more prisoner exchanges, diplomacy remains far from reach.
Now, Kaylin O'Connell witnessed one of the most horrendous Russian strikes on the Ukrainian capital last night. She joins us now from Kiev. Kaylin, thank you for joining us. Now, can you talk us through what happened to you?
Yeah, we were here last night, witnessed one of the biggest aerial attacks up until this point. It was, I think, well over 700 drones and missiles combined. My grandpa was standing on the balcony watching the missiles and drones go by. We heard, I think the scariest part is hearing the drones. You hear the drones approach and you hear them get closer and closer, and it's hard to tell if they're going to stop or if they're going to keep coming closer. I think that was one of the most terrifying moments. My grandpa also said that he saw a lot less missile defense. So we heard a lot of machine gun defense, which was also striking because we usually don't hear such like pounding machine gun sounds right like below our neighborhood. Yeah, it's been such a distraught to see the city that I grew up in to turn into such a pit of terror. There's now even a statue in the middle of Kiev, a giant black cloud representing the elephant in the room, the ongoing war, even as people continue their lives.
So you're in Kiev now. You're in Kiev now. Tell me how the atmosphere is in the aftermath of these strikes.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at. The atmosphere is very everyone is aware of the war, everyone is aware of the terror, and everyone is trying their best to get through the day and, get through the night. I was in my local store today. I said good day, and she said, I hope it is one. Let's hope that it will be a good day and a good night, because you really never know.
And how are you feeling safe in Kiev at the moment?
Currently, I feel safe. I have the option to go to shelter nearby every moment, if I feel the need to. My grandparents have lived here all 4 years through the war, so if they have, I believe that 2 weeks won't kill me. But there's always this idea that in moments of stress and terror, you think that you're going to be the exception, and sometimes you're not, and that's the most terrifying part. That there's people constantly every day, thousands who aren't not thousands, but who aren't the exception. And
talk us through, that process of, when you hear the strikes going on, how do you react, and how do the locals around you, how do they react?
Last night, I was actually pretty terrified. Usually I'm more calm. Last night it was extremely harsh, extremely loud, very close, pretty insane. So last night I was terrified. I was crying, but I didn't want to go to the shelter because it takes time to get there. You don't know if shelling is going to hit you on the way there. You don't know. I'm on the 11th floor. You don't know what can happen going down 11 floors. So I just felt like a little bit trapped. My grandparents were obviously very calm. They survived the entire war. They see this as often as it happens, but I remember being very scared last night.
Thank you for your time and for joining us on the programme, Kaylin.
Thank you.
Now, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, expressing Washington's frustration over the lack of progress in ending the war in Ukraine.
Hello, boys and girls.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says he conveyed Washington's frustration over the lack of progress in ending the war in Ukraine during a meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The two met on the sidelines of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Summit in Kuala Lumpur, marking their second face-to-face encounter. Rubio said he urged greater flexibility from Russia to help bring the conflict to an end.
We will engage any time that we have an opportunity to do so, like we did today. I echoed what the president has said, both a disappointment and frustration at the lack of progress in peace talks or in a path forward. So we'll continue to engage. We shared some ideas and comments, which I'll take back to Washington as early as this evening in terms of calls and reflected, and perhaps there's something to build on there. But it was a frank conversation. It was an important one. We had it, and we talked about some other items as well and related to the war in Ukraine, but that was obviously the first and foremost topic that we discussed.
The meeting comes as US President Donald Trump, who returned to office this year vowing to end the war swiftly, has grown increasingly frustrated with Russian President Vladimir Putin as the conflict drags on. Trump earlier said he is considering supporting legislation that would impose steep sanctions on Russia, including 500% tariffs on countries that purchase Russian oil, gas, uranium, or other exports. He has also announced a plan to supply weapons to Ukraine through NATO. Under the deal, US weapons would be transferred to NATO, paid for by the alliance, and then redistributed to Ukraine. The package could include defensive Patriot missiles and offensive medium-range rockets, though a final decision on the specific equipment has not yet been made.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has met the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi for the first time since taking office. The talk focused on trade tensions, regional security and the future of US-China relations. Our China correspondent Manu McDoom has more from Beijing.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio met Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi today on the sidelines of ASEAN Foreign Ministers Conference in Kuala Lumpur. It was their first face-to-face meeting since Rubio took office, coming at a tense moment in China-US relations. Trade tensions dominated the discussion, with Rubio voicing concerns over China's latest US tariffs set to take effect on August 1. He urged for restraint and renewed dialogue. Wang criticized Washington's protectionist measures and called for a return to fair and stable trade ties. While no agreement was reached, both sides agreed to continue communication. Security issues were also raised, including China's indirect support for Russia during the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the rising tensions in South China Sea. Rubio reaffirmed U.S. support for regional allies and freedom for navigation. Wang responded by warning against American interference in regional matters. While no major breakthrough was achieved during this meeting, it was described as frank and constructive. A News, Beijing.
South Korea says the United States has demanded, as part of ongoing trade talks, that Seoul join efforts to curb China. According to Seoul's trade ministry, Washington is making joint action against China a precondition for bilateral cooperation in the shipbuilding sector. The official noted that the US sees China's growing market share in shipbuilding as a threat and is looking to South Korea as a strategic partner. The US is also asking Seoul to increase investments in the purchases of American energy and agricultural products in exchange for negotiating a reduction of reciprocal tariffs. Amid global anticipation of sweeping tariff announcement, President Trump has confirmed a 35% tariff on Canadian imports, a sharp hike targeting America's northern neighbour. Canada is responding firmly, vowing to continue negotiations while defending its workers and businesses ahead of the August 1st deadline.
US President Donald Trump announced on Thursday that starting August 1st, the United States will impose a 35% tariff on imports from Canada, a steep increase from the current 25% rate. In his letter, Trump warned Canada that tariffs would rise further if it retaliates. This decision also comes as the White House plans to roll out blanket tariffs ranging from 15% to 20% on many other trading partners, signalling a broad push to reduce trade deficits and protect American industries. Trump's letter cited ongoing concerns over fentanyl flowing into the United States from Canada, despite Canadian officials stating that just a tiny fraction fentanyl seized at the US border originates from the north. The US president also pointed to Canadian tariff and non-tariff trade barriers that he says harm US dairy farmers and other American sectors. Despite the looming tariffs, an exclusion remains for goods covered under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, and key sectors like energy and fertilizer may see exemptions, though final decisions on those remain pending. Reacting late Thursday night, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney took to social media to assure Canadians that his government is steadfast in defending Canadian workers and businesses during these difficult negotiations. He emphasised progress made to combat the fentanyl crisis, highlighting joint efforts to protect communities in both countries. The Prime Minister also underscored ongoing efforts to build a stronger Canadian economy, foster national projects, and strengthen international trade partnerships despite mounting pressures. With just weeks before the new tariffs take effect, trade talks continue under intense scrutiny, as both sides grapple with the potential fallout of what many fear could be a damaging tariff war between long-time allies.
France and Britain have agreed to reinforce cooperation with their respective nuclear arsenals by signing the Northwood Declaration. The move comes as the two European powerhouses seek to respond to growing threats to the continent and uncertainty over their US ally. The deal was announced at the end of President Emmanuel Macron's three-day state visit to the UK on Thursday. Prime Minister Keir Starmer called the pact historic. Macron clarified the move is unrelated to their support for Ukraine and said the message is meant for both allies and adversaries.
We all agree the situation.
Iran's foreign minister has warned Europe that any move to reimpose UN sanctions would end its role in nuclear negotiations. In an interview with Le Monde, Abbas Araghchi also ruled out missile talks and called for condemnation of attacks on Iran's nuclear sites. Our Iran correspondent Taraz Shiralilu reports from Tehran.
Foreign Minister Araghchi said to prove that Europe is independent and impartial, it shall condemn the June attacks on Iran's nuclear sites under UN safeguards, and also refrain from threatening Iran about reactivation of the nuclear sanctions by the world body. In an interview with the Paris-based Le Monde newspaper, he said, if the snapback of sanctions, also known as the trigger mechanism, is activated, it will terminate EU's role in Iran's peaceful nuclear program talks. Araqchi was warning about the threat by the European Troika of France, Germany, and the UK as signatories of the 2015 nuclear agreement to apply for the return of sanctions at UN in October if Iran is found of non-compliance of its obligations. Asked about Tehran's relations with the International Atomic Energy Agency after Iran suspended its ties with the UN watchdog in the wake of the agency's failure to condemn the US-Israeli attacks, he said, Iran has complied with its obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Also, replying to a question about renewed Iran-US talks, he set out Tehran's conditions and added, it must be guaranteed that in the future, during negotiations, the US does not launch military attacks. Prior to the 12-day war which Israel waged on 13th June, Iran and US were scheduled to meet for the 6th time indirectly in Muscat, Oman on 15th June to discuss Iran's alternative proposal to a US draft. Later, on 22nd June, US became a party to the war and joined Israel by bombing Iran's 3 major sites under IAEA monitoring. In the interview with Le Monde, Araqchi also categorically ruled out negotiations on Iran's ballistic missile program, which he described as deterrent and defensive. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting for A News TV, Tehran.
At the 9th OPEC International Seminar in Vienna, energy leaders were discussing the balance between fossil fuels and the urgent need for renewables. In an exclusive interview with A News, Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency, Francesco La Camera, shared his thoughts on the matter.
Hi everyone, we're here at the 9th OPEC International Seminar in Vienna at the historic Hofburg Palace. I'm very pleased to be joined by Francesco La Camera. He is the Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency. Sir, very good to be with you.
My pleasure.
We had COP29 in Baku. It was a huge event. Key dignitaries were there talking about the need to preserve oil, but also move forward with respect to renewables. What kind of a dialogue are you expecting on that front here, sir?
You know, we as the International Renewable Energy Agency, we never ask to stop oil and gas production, simply because it was not realistic. No? What is important to understand that we need to be in a path that is consistent with the achievement of the Paris Agreement goals, because these belong to the international community that all has agreed to keep the rising of the temperature by the end of the century to 1.5. So this, I think, should be the golden rule, and under this golden rule there is space for collaboration and space for everyone. And naturally the share of oil and gas in the market should decline if we want to be consistent with the achievement of Paris Agreement. There is no doubt about that. And renewables has to jump up. But as we see today, we still don't have the speed and scale needed for making the change happening in a way that makes sure for us not to be affected by the damage.
Now, to mark the Srebrenica Genocide Remembrance Day, A News is revisiting its special reports, documenting genocides and crimes against humanity around the world. These are the stories of loss, survival, and the urgent need to never forget.
The largest massacre in Europe since the Holocaust, Srebrenica Genocide marks its 30th anniversary. In the scorching heat of July 1995, Bosnian Serb forces stormed Srebrenica, a town in eastern Bosnia and Herzegovina. Though the United Nations had declared it a safe area during the 1992 to 1995 Bosnian War, it fell to nationalist forces led by General Ratko Mladic. In the days that followed, more than 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys were systematically executed.
They got in, they entered. Simply, people were left to their own devices. Some of them decided to go on the path through the woods. Some of them sought salvation here where the Dutch battalion was. There were trucks here and buses here in front of this gate. People were getting on them. Men were separated here. I had 2 daughters, and thankfully they were daughters, so they got out. They weren't men. My husband did not want to come here. He decided to go through the woods. Trucks and buses were stopped. Male children were being taken out of them. Here is where the mothers screamed for their children.
It was a horrifying act of ethnic violence committed in the final year of the war that followed the disintegration of Yugoslavia. For survivors and victims' families, the trauma of the genocide runs deep, and its impact still lingers throughout Bosnian society, making true reconciliation between ethnic groups painfully difficult.
I got on the truck with 2 of my wounded sons. When we came to Chitra, as we were coming out, the Chetniks took them. I said, "Those are my 2 sons that are wounded." They pushed me away with a rifle, saying, "Go, they will come." That's that. I found 2 sons, the eldest and the youngest, but I haven't found the middle one.
I buried my mother, my sister-in-law, 2 of my brothers and 2 nephews. From my uncle, my father's brother, 8 of them are gone. From 2 brothers, 12 of them were gone in a day. They were healthy and well. That is something that needs to be survived. You return to nothing, but you have to live on. What are you going to do?
The remains of those killed in Srebrenica are still being buried, as many bodies have yet to be found or fully identified. In most cases, families discovered only fragments of their loved ones' bones scattered across multiple mass graves. For some, it took years to recover a complete body, while others are still waiting for more remains to be located. Some families received only a single body part, which they buried in order to provide a final resting place and a sense of closure.
My sons were born in 74 and in 77. They left when Srebrenica fell and never came back. One of them was found in Snugovo, his complete body, and the other was found in 4 or 5 mass graves. We added more bones to his grave 3 times. So far, I told them not to call me anymore.
Up until today, out of the 8,372 registered missing persons from the Srebrenica area, we would go on to find more than 7,000. I think the number is around 7,100, which means that about 1,200 victims of the Srebrenica genocide is still missing.
Both the International Court of Justice and the UN Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia formally recognized the Srebrenica as a genocide. In May 2024, nearly 3 decades after the atrocity, the UN General Assembly declared July 11th as the International Day of Reflection and Commemoration of the Genocide in Srebrenica. 30 years on, the legacy of Srebrenica casts a long shadow over Bosnia and Herzegovina. It serves as a solemn reminder of the consequences of unchecked nationalism and the urgent need for remembrance, justice, and reconciliation.
PKK fighters have begun laying down arms in northern Iraq, marking what could be a turning point in their decades-long conflict with Turkey. In a rare and symbolic moment, fighters from the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party were seen burning their weapons during a disarmament ceremony near Suleimania in northern Iraq. The move comes as part of the group's decision to end armed operations after more than 4 decades of insurgency against Turkey. The handover process could take several months. Ankara, however, says clashes are still ongoing and continues targeting PKK sites in the region. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev received Georgia's Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development, Maryam Kvarivishvili, in Baku on Friday. He congratulated the newly appointed minister and noted that her visit to Azerbaijan, shortly after assuming her duties, underscored the close partnership between the two nations. The sides discussed ongoing strategic cooperation across energy, transport and trade, emphasising Azerbaijan's position as one of Georgia's main economic partners and the potential to further expand trade turnover. Well, tensions between Georgia and the EU are escalating again, this time over the upcoming local elections. The Parliament Speaker accuses Brussels of trying to disrupt the vote. Here's our Georgia correspondent Nini Nikolaishvili with more details.
12 weeks ahead of Georgia's local elections, the Speaker of Parliament, Shalva Papashvili, is accusing the European Union of political interference. In a sharply worded post, he claimed that the European Parliament's July 9 resolution is nothing less than an attempt to disrupt the election process in Georgia. The resolution adopted in Strasbourg calls on opposition parties in Georgia to consider boycotting upcoming vote. It was supported by the European Commissioner Marta Kos and the member of European Parliament Rasa Yuknevichna, who authored the text. But in Tbilisi, this message was received very differently. Abashvili described this as the first direct interference by Brussels in current election cycle, suggesting it's aimed at destabilizing the process and ultimately denies Georgian citizens their right to vote. The statement fits into a growing pattern of anti-Brussels rhetoric from the ruling Georgian Dream Party. It comes just weeks after the European Union criticized Georgia for adopting a controversial foreign agents law and just months before a key test of Georgia's democratic credibility. As the tensions between Tbilisi and Brussels is getting colder, the stakes of the upcoming local elections and the narratives around it is just getting higher. It's Nini Nikolaishvili reporting from Tbilisi, A News.
Previously on Inside Politics, Anastasia Lavrina discussed the meeting between President Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan in Abu Dhabi with energy security specialist John Roberts. John explained what Azerbaijan can offer to Armenia and how both countries could help each other.
I don't think there's much in terms of energy connections that will change. The international routes for getting oil and gas out of Azerbaijan to commercial markets via Georgia and Turkey are well established. And the sheer cost of building, for instance, new oil or gas lines through Armenia, even though they would be shorter, make little point at this stage. But there is something in energy that I think is worthwhile. If there is peace, then both Armenia and Azerbaijan become better places in which to invest. Now, from an Azerbaijani perspective, one of the issues is that their oil is at best at plateau and more probably actually in a state of decline. So that means you need fresh investment in the exploration and production of prospects that have already been identified but not yet drilled. So a company like Exxon would naturally be interested. It has had long ties and involvement in Azerbaijani energy, but I think it's a kind of marginal investment that just gets that little bit better at a time of peace. With regard to Armenia, the real question is, what do you do about the nuclear reactor? At what point do you start getting a replacement for that reactor? And at what point do you start thinking, what kind of energy can Armenia produce? And the slightly smaller but still interesting perspective that 15 years ago or so, the deputy foreign ministers of both Armenia and Azerbaijan said that if there were to be peace, then they would be happy for Azerbaijani oil and gas to go into Armenia and Armenia's Deputy Foreign Minister said they'd be happy to receive it.
Once a conflict zone, Azerbaijan's Lachin is now drawing global attention for its rapid transformation. A delegation from the Most Travelled People Club is visiting the region to witness its remarkable reconstruction and stunning nature firsthand. Leila Rahimli reports from Lachin.
We are now in Lachin, a strategically located region in eastern Zangezur, surrounded by stunning mountains and newly built infrastructure. Today is a part of a very special journey organized by the world-famous Most Travelled People Club, or MTP. The delegation includes 30 travelers from 15 countries, led by MTP's founder, American explorer Charlie Wally. So, what brings them here? Their mission is simple but powerful: to explore the places that are often overlooked and to understand the deeper stories that don't always make the headlines. So the group just arrived in Lachin to see some of the most recent reconstruction efforts, including new residential areas, public buildings, modern roads and utility infrastructure. One of the highlights was the visit to Lachin Panoramic Viewpoint, or Lachin Seyrangahı, a newly developed space that offers breathtaking views and symbolizing a fresh chapter for the region. This international team includes experienced travelers, bloggers, photographers and traveler professionals, many of whom have already been to more than 100 countries. For most of them, this is their first time to visiting Azerbaijan's liberated regions, and also many have explored other post-conflict zones. Globally, they say the path and scope of the reconstruction in Lachin is remarkable. And soon their impressions through photos, videos and stories will reach audience across Europe, Asia and North America, helping the world see what is really happening here beyond borders and beyond assumptions.
Well, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.